Well, what I'd like to do is just offer a few words of gratitude and prayer, and then we can turn it over to Anne. It was Megan who met Anne at a bonfire, which proved to be a wonderful contact and inspiring. And we are deeply grateful that Anne is joining us. And she and her husband, her partner, have done a lot of research, and I think advocacy around green burial, and more of us are interested. And so let's begin with a word of prayer. And I would just invite you to take 3 deep breaths. And we know that green burial is about connecting to the earth in a natural way, in the way that most creatures do already. We give thanks to you, our Creator, for the miraculous ways that you have designed and created a way for beings, to human beings and other created beings, to decompose and come back into the earth. And we give thanks for the creation of new life. And we give thanks for this opportunity to learn more. And so we give thanks in the name of Jesus, our friend and teacher and healer. Amen.
Amen.
So I'm going to pass the baton to Anne, our guest speaker, and go to it, Anne. We're glad you're here. Very grateful for your care and your advocacy for this idea, this vision.
Thank you. Thank you. My estate attorney introduced me to the notion of green burial. She was giving a talk, and she said, how many of you folks have decided how you're going to dispose of your bodies? And all of us, being very wise people, because we were at this financial planning thing, raised our hands. And she said, what you going to do about it? And we thought, this is kind of a strange question for an attorney to be asking. And I said, why do you want to know? And she said, this is the first thing I ask all of my clients, because we got to know what we're going to do with you. It's not just about your stuff. We need to know about you, where we're putting you, where we're putting all your digital stuff, but where are you going? So she said, how many people have thought about cremation? And all us baby boomers raised our hands because we were, smart, and we were not going to do any of that formaldehyde business and get ourselves buried down deep in coffins and crypts and that sort of thing. And she said, did you know that there is a really horrendous carbon footprint with cremation, which kind of surprised us. She said, I'd like you to consider green burial. So we looked into it. We went over to a place in Wake Forest that was attached to a standard conventional landscape cemetery. And the place was essentially a dump. I wouldn't have asked my children to leave me there. They've since cleaned the place up. But my husband and I, as we were coming home, said, just how hard would it be to bury somebody green? Well, it turned out it was pretty hard. So what I'm going to do is tell you what we found out, tell you what's available for you guys, give you some pricing, tell you what's legal and not legal, and give you some additional sustainable options for body disposition that you may not have heard about, or if you have heard about, you've thought, oh, that's just too off the wall. I can't even imagine what that's about. But I will answer all of your strange and wonderful questions. Because I won't be able to see you as we're going through the PowerPoint, it would help if you could hold your questions till the end, and then whatever you want to know, we'll have a free-for-all. Okay? We good? Okay. The case for green burial. If you learn nothing else from me, green burial is three things. It's no embalming, it's no vault, and it's a biodegradable coffin or shroud. You are not required, no matter what a funeral director tells you, to be embalmed in the state of North Carolina or in any other state in the United States. You are not required to be embalmed. Now, they may have a policy, and Hall Wynn in Durham has a policy that if you want to have a viewing at their funeral home, you will have to be embalmed. I will tell you that I assisted a colleague of mine with a home funeral. His body was on display in his home for 3 days, and he was not embalmed. And in those 3 days, there was no smell, no discoloration, no slippage of his skin. The embalming business is a way for funeral directors to make money. There are ways around embalming, and you don't have to do it. The vault is another one of those, oh, we have a policy kinds of issues. Some churchyards now insist on vaults. Most landscape cemeteries, conventional cemeteries, require vaults. The state of North Carolina does not require a vault. The vault does nothing for you. It does nothing for the deceased. It does nothing for the family. What it does is it keeps the ground from settling over the coffin or into the coffin, should the coffin break down over time. And it keeps the land level so that the guy mowing the grass doesn't have to get out and backfill the spaces. It does not serve a purpose for the family. It serves a purpose for the guy mowing the grass. And you are not required to have one in the state of North Carolina. The last thing is biodegradable coffin or shroud. I should add also here that you're not required in the state of North Carolina to have a coffin of any sort, a shroud of any sort, or even clothes. You can be buried in the same outfit you were born in. It might shock the people who come to your burial, but you're not required to have any of those items. So let's look for a minute about what Americans are currently doing. This is the most current data I have. The final data for 2019 had about 2.8 million Americans registering deaths in the United States. In the 8 years that I've been doing this business, the percentage of burials and cremations has exactly flip-flopped. So about 36% of people get buried in the US, 57% get cremated. And the other options that most people know about are gifts to science. This is body donation of one sort or another. Water cremation or alkaline hydrolysis. We'll talk about this during the Q&A, but I want you to know that this is a very green option, and it's available to us here in Orange County. Burial reefs, burial at sea, home burial, recomposition. This is human composting. It's now legal in 8 states, not North Carolina yet, but it's a good solution for urban areas because your body is reduced to about a cubic yard of compost after about between 30 and 60 days. Your family can take the compost home, or it can be scattered in national parks. Let's go on to the next one. Every other year, the Funeral Consumers Alliance of North Carolina does a funeral price survey. And the basic services fee on a general price list ranges in our area from $515 to $5,900. What's the difference there? I don't know. You're going to be making one of the biggest financial decisions of your life on the worst day of your life. And are you going to go around figuring out what $515 will get you as opposed to $5,900? The embalming fee is all over the map again, transportation all over the map again, and casket prices. This $50 is for something that's roughly equivalent to an egg carton, a paper egg carton. The $34,000 is the coffin that Elvis Presley was buried in. You can get that coffin for your very self. That was just the funeral costs. These are your burial costs. So there's the plot price, vault and grave liner. So I'm telling you that you need to skip the vault. This is, you know, what we're talking about here. Opening and closing the grave is another fee. Endowment care is sometimes bundled in with these other prices, sometimes not. Headstone and marker can be great big honking angels or little flat stones. But you also need to keep in mind that there will be an additional fee for setting that stone in a conventional cemetery. I have been to a cemetery where behind a wooden fence, there were a lot of monuments, granite monuments that had not been set because the families had had a run-in with the monument company and would not pay to have the monument set. So they are sitting in a storage area, not on the graves. So let's move to cremations. This is the direct cremation is one of your cheapest options. If you have every expectation that you're going to have a memorial service down the road and you just want to have a quick body disposition option, direct cremation is what you ask for. Again, Funeral Consumers Alliance of North Carolina did a funeral price survey, and again, prices all over the map. What you will need to be careful of when you're reading a general price list is to make sure that on the line that says direct cremation and it lists all the items, you also want to make sure that the cremation fee is included there, because sometimes it's not. And you would think that general price lists would be uniform because of the Federal Trade Commission ruling about general price lists, but in fact they are not uniform. And sometimes the cremation fee is a separate line item. So my guess is that perhaps this $895 doesn't include the cremation itself. It would include paperwork, transportation, other sorts of things. And urn plots are relatively cheap. So that was the financial cost. What's the environmental cost? We are currently burying approximately 800,000 gallons of formaldehyde-based solution. This formaldehyde is used as a preservative. It helps keep the tissues firm. Mostly embalmers will, in the general trade, will embalm for 3 days. They are not trying to keep you like the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, They are not trying to embalm you so that you are good for 2 years in an anatomy lab. They are just trying to get the job done so that you are presentable for a viewing and a burial in 3 days' time. We are burying an awful lot of bronze and copper and steel, hardwoods, concrete in these stupid vaults, and cremation fuel. If you were driving my Prius, you'd get about halfway to California on the fuel that it takes to reduce a body to ash. So how do we reduce the environmental costs? We skip the embalming altogether. We choose a low impact coffin, certified forest. What is forest? Anyway, this certifying agency makes sure that the forests are sustainably managed. They are not clear-cut forests. Using unfinished wood, willow, felted wood, cardboard. There is a very fine coffin maker. He used to live in Hillsborough. He's now in Mebane. But for $1,500, you can get a handmade coffin with dovetail joints. The lid is attached with pegs. There's no metal in it. There's no glue. The wood comes from Chatham County, and it's about as sustainable as a box can be in our area. I like willow baskets, felted wood, and that sort of thing, wool. But sometimes the carbon footprint to get them from wherever they're made to here makes them a little less attractive. There's a place in Asheville where they make cardboard coffins out of regular old corrugated cardboard that are sturdy enough to hold a 350-pound person. A nice thing about those is they can be decorated. If you have the coffin at a viewing or a visitation, either in the home or a church hall, getting markers and paints and pens and crayons for families, children, to leave messages on or in the cardboard box is a really nice idea. It makes it much more personal. Choosing a shroud. Really, if you have swaddled a baby with a square piece of flannel, you know how to put a shroud together. Take a square piece, put the person on a diagonal, put the piece over a corner over the head, a corner over the feet, wrap the other sides around, and tie it with some sort of sustainable fabric or rope. And you've got yourself a sustainable shroud. Select a cemetery that doesn't require a vault or a grave liner. That's going to be, honestly, your hardest choice if you're going green. I talked, Union Grove United Methodist Church was interested in green burial, and I went out to talk to their trustees. They were a little concerned about how big they were going to have to make the holes, because ordinarily they would have backhoe come in. The funeral director would request a backhoe, and they wanted to know if they were going to have to backfill this grave and that sort of thing. It turned out it was no big deal over and above what they were already doing to keep the land in the cemetery the way they wanted to have it. But I talked to another United Methodist church shortly after that, who also had a cemetery, and I suggested this, and they said, "Oh no, we got to have the vaults. You know, we can't be going around backfilling these graves. They've just got to hold up, and that's the way it's always been. That's the way it's going to be." And I said, "How old's your cemetery?" "Oh, it's like 90 years old." And I said, "That's not the way it's always been. Vaults are a new thing." And if you decide on cremation, on fire cremation, choose a crematory that uses pollutant filters and scrubbers that are relatively new. Again, you're going to have to do some research on this. There are no directories that say Hall Wind does this, Blue Stem Cemetery does that. There's no directory for it. You're going to have to do the research. So keep in touch with your local environmentalists if you're interested in this. As long as I'm in business, I've got a website that you can come to. I will give you my phone number, my personal phone number, and we will get you what you need to have, hopefully as quick as you need to have it. So if you decided to go green, what's that going to cost you? Now, this $750 plot price made me so happy. This is the price that the town of Carrboro charges Carrboro residents for a plot in a Carrboro town cemetery. They, about 3 years ago, authorized changing the Old Town Cemetery near the Greenway and the railroad tracks down by Carmel Mall to be a green cemetery. It had originally been green. It's an old cemetery. So the original graves did not have vaults. And about 3 years ago, they decided that they would sell plots that didn't require vaults anymore. Well, a colleague of mine who is a home funeral guide and I managed to sell out the old Carrboro Cemetery because we went running around the community saying, this is one place where you can get a good price and the land is beautiful and it's an old cemetery. And people just went out by the numbers and bought up all the plots there. So I believe Carrboro has opened their other cemetery to green burials, but I'm not positive about that. Now, if you're not a Carrboro resident, you can still buy a plot, but it's twice the price. This $4,500 charge is for a conservation cemetery, a green cemetery that was just opened this fall out in Cedar Grove called Blue Stem, and it's a 501c3. The price seems a little high, but if you're not paying $5,000 or $10,000 for a coffin, and you're not paying for a vault, and you're not paying for embalming, you're really money ahead, even paying the $4,500 to Blue Stem. Some of these other prices where it says zero are bundled into the higher end plot prices. Some are not. So these are the green burial grounds I know about in North Carolina. It doesn't seem like there are very many, but as soon as I get a new name, I add it to the list. And so that list is on my website. So what do you do? Your next steps. Well, you decide what you want first. And that's a gift you are giving to your family, is making this decision ahead of time. And you want to write it down. You want your advance directives in place. You want your will in place. You want any specific instructions about disposition of your remains in place, and in a place where the people who are going to be executing your instructions can find them when they need them. It's not going to do any good, obviously, to put it in your safety deposit box at the bank. This stuff needs to be in your home, and the people who are tasked with being your healthcare agent, executing your will, all those kinds of things, need to know where these documents are. They need to know who your attorney is. They need to know who your doctors are. And, you know, all of these forms you may or may not use, but I recommend all of them. If you ever need a talk about advanced directives, I am a trained facilitator, in the 5 wishes and the North Carolina advanced directives, and I will come out and do a workshop for free. I'm also a notary public. I will notarize your documents for free. This is, it is deeply personal, sometimes troubling. Whenever you are faced with these existential questions about why am I here? Where am I going? What do I intend to do with my life? What do I intend to do with my death? Those opportunities for reflection and decision-making are sometimes extraordinarily difficult. But when they're done, they're done. And if you will check those documents once a year, people often do it on their birthdays, or they do it January 1st, or they do it as soon as they finish the taxes. Some guide point in the year that would remind you to review these documents. Please review them on a regular basis, because some, you know, if all of your power of attorney choices have predeceased you, some of your documents may be less helpful than others. And the last thing is discuss it with your family. Discuss it with the people who are going to be executing the documents and the people who might give them crap about it. If you have some notion that the eldest son is never going to be able to let his mother go, even if she's got a specific advance directive that says, don't keep me alive artificially, and the son is going to give people crap about it, then he's not going to be the healthcare agent, because he's not going to execute your wishes. And you want him and the rest of the family to be prepared for the decisions you've made after deep reflection, so that there's no fighting about it at a really awful time for them. I worked for Duke Hospice as a hospice volunteer for 17 years. And there were occasions when the Durham City Police had to come out to the hospice home to break up fights in the hall between family members who thought that it was a sin and a crime that mom had been put on hospice because hospice was going to kill her, and people who had cared for mom for years and years and knew when they saw it that the end was coming and that this needed to happen in this particular way. Discuss it with the people who are on your side and the people who are not on your side, because you don't want anybody caught off guard. This little list of resources will be helpful to you. And as I said, I will send the slides to Stephanie so that she can make them available to all of you. The Green Burial Council is the certifying agency for North America. They certify green burial grounds, funeral homes, and service and products suppliers. You don't have to be in a place that's certified by the Green Burial Council. Some very wonderful cemeteries are not certified. It's sort of a good housekeeping seal of approval. But if your cemetery doesn't need such a thing, like Historic Oakwood in Raleigh, they're on the top line here. Historic Oakwood doesn't need any certification because everybody knows who Historic Oakwood is, and they know that they are a reputable outfit. But what do you know about Forest Lawn in Candler? What do you know about Sanctuary of the Burrow in Moncure? Well, you could drive out there, or if they are on the Green Burial Council certified list, you'd have some idea about what their standards are and what they have committed to do for the community. If you're looking for green burial cemeteries in the rest of the US and Canada, this site here, the New Hampshire Funeral Organization, keeps a list up in real time. And if you know somebody in Illinois who says, hey, I need to get buried green, where can I go? This is the place you look them up. Funeral Consumers Alliance of North Carolina is a membership organization. You pay, I think, $10 and then you're a member for life, however long that happens to be. And these folks are out lobbying for transparency in the execution of funeral directors' work. And they do the every other year funeral price survey. The Funeral Consumers Alliance National Organization lobbies in Washington for you. And if you have not heard of death cafes, these are social groups that get together on a regular basis, generally over food and drink. And they're people who have questions or interest in death care, funerals. Sometimes you get into near-death experiences in some of these conversations. There's no agenda. You just show up and talk. And one of my colleagues has been running the one in Mebane for 8 years. There's one in Raleigh that's very good. It's held in a funeral home. And the Hillsborough Death Cafe will be gearing back up this year. And I think that will be in the facility in Hillsborough that does the alkaline hydrolysis. Again, we'll talk about that in the Q&A. So one question I often get is, can you get buried in your own backyard? And the answer to that question is yes. Wayne Johnson was a colleague of mine for a number of years. And in February of the year he died, he found out that he had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. It was all over his body and he had less than a year to live. Soon as I hadn't worked with Wayne for about 5 years, but as soon as I found out he was sick, I called him up and I said, I don't mean to insert myself into your life at this time, but I would like to come over and talk to you and tell you what you have meant to me and how much I love you and how sorry I am that this is happening to you. So I got there and I was all dressed up in business clothes and he asked me what that was about. And I said, well, today I just gave a talk on green burial. And we talked about green burial and he said, could I do this in my backyard? And I said, yep. And he said, well, you know, he lived on Tryon Road. And if you're familiar with Raleigh, that is a road that is just jam-packed with gas stations, nail salons, fast food franchise places, McMansions, apartment complexes, more gas stations. And Wayne lived on a 100-acre farm that his family had owned for 100 years. And he wanted to protect it from development. And he said, there's not much I can do once I'm dead. But if I could spoil some of this land for developers, I'd really like to do that. He said, not only would I like to be buried on my own family's land, but I would like to protect it too from developers. So we buried him on his own land. There is no law against it. There's no regulation in Raleigh against being buried on your own property, as long as you comply with setbacks, 50 feet from a property line, 50 feet from a dwelling, 50 feet from a well, bop, 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 bop. And on the day he was buried, he had been at home, he had died at home. He was washed and dressed by a hospice nurse and one of his friends. His friends also put him into his coffin. We put Techni ice around him, which is a product that you freeze and it holds its cold like a cooler, soft cooler pack that you would put in your lunch bucket. And we kept him as he asked us to do, presentable. He said, I don't ever want to look anything other than beautiful. And I said, Wayne, it's on my conscience to make sure that you are never anything other than beautiful in front of your friends and family. And so for those days, he was. And I was the last person to see him. I closed the coffin at the end of the 3 days before the funeral. And these are his friends lowering him into a grave in his backyard. And you too could be buried in your own backyard. So that's me. Looks like my phone number is not on there, but I will make sure that it is on there when I send it to Stephanie. And I'm going to knock that down and ask if anyone has any questions. Oh, let's talk about alkaline hydrolysis. This is water cremation. There are 3 water cremation machines in the state of North Carolina. One is in Hillsborough. This is too cool for words, ladies and gentlemen. Water cremation is different from flame cremation in that you are using a bath of water and a base solution to melt the soft tissues of the body. You're put into a big steel container, sort of like a pressure cooker. There's a little bit of pressure, there's a little bit of heat, and after 3 or 4 hours, you are reduced, as you would be with flame cremation, to a skeleton. You are then, your skeleton is crushed to a powder-like substance, what we call cremains or ashes. It's put in an urn and it comes back to your family. The water is pH balanced. There's no DNA in it. It's sterile and it is flushed down the public water system or sprinkled on gardens, whatever the local community wants to do with it. Some people say, oh, well, I wouldn't want all that stuff going down in the sewer system. And my response to that is, have you got any idea what comes out of a funeral home and goes into the sewer system? And they've got an idea and they don't want to talk about it. And I understand that because it's not a pretty sight. But this, I am so pumped about this. And I think Hunter is charging for pickup, paperwork, storage, a biodegradable urn, $2,500. And that's what I know about alkaline hydrolysis. Any questions? Well, we can all go home and, oh, we are home. Thanks for your time. Again, if there are any questions you've got, give me a call.
I think we have time for some questions. Why don't we just take a pause? Because I think folks are thinking.
Okay.
I know Charles, you're planning a green burial on your own land. Is that right?
Yes, that's what I hope to have happen. And I had to cover some of the ground that Ann shared with me tonight because I thought it was very humorous when I called the county officials in Stanley County. They said, well, we suggest you get in touch with Hartselle Funeral Home. They can advise you on what to do. Of course, they buried every Coble for the last 200 years, so they probably do know what to do. But I pretty much decided that to have that happen at the farm. I think, and what I'm beginning to realize too is that you really have to do some preparation work ahead of time. Like, okay, so I want to be buried on this farm, but there are trees down there. There are places that get flooded routinely, and there are other places. So I think, I have my homework to do to select that site and to really maybe get friends of mine down in my hometown to go ahead and get the backhoe and, dig it up and then put the soil back in there so they don't have to do that within a couple of days.
Right.
So prepared, if you will, but
Charles, I can't, it's like somebody gave you a 3x5 card to mention this. Megan, who recommended that I come talk to you, heard me speak at the rural home place of a mutual friend of ours. And Vibrance is actually one of my groupies. I think if I gave a talk on the Yellow Pages, she would come to it and bring a crowd. But when she was thinking about green burial on her property, she said, well, what if it's wintertime and the ground is hard and they can't dig it up? And I said, oh, well, I just learned this about Vermont. What they do there is that in the fall, they dig a number of graves and fill them with peat moss, so that if they need grave space in the winter, they don't have to put heated blankets or, use dynamite or anything to get the hole dug. And Vibrance has done that in Orange County. She had the hole dug and she had it filled with peat moss, and it's covered up, and she's got it lined with decorative stones. And it's one of those memento mori that sort of reminds her on a regular basis that her time here is limited. Now, one thing you want to do, you're correct that you need to check in Stanley County about what the rules and regs are there, because every county is different. There are some counties that don't have any setback requirements at all. You can put somebody on a property line and it would be okay in that county. That's not the case around here. But one thing you want to do is you want to draw a little map of your property showing the structures, the property lines, and where the grave is going to be. And you file that little map, and it's just a hand-drawn map. You don't have to get a surveyor or anything, just a little hand-drawn map, and you put it with your deed at the courthouse. And you do this for two reasons. One is that, say somebody buys your farm and they look around and they go, that place back there in the back 40 that is so green, that would be the place to transplant grandmother's heirloom roses. And they dig it up, and up comes a femur. And then what have you got but a potential crime scene? Okay. So what you want to do is keep that from happening. You want people to be aware when they purchase this property that they are now cohabitating with you or some relative of yours. The second thing is that your family has right of perpetual access to your grave, even if that property's been sold. But the people who own the property have to know about it. And if you want to go on Christmas and leave flowers, or you want to go on Memorial Day and leave a little flag, or you want to go on some other day and do gardening on that spot, they have to give you access, but only if they know that it's there. So those are the two reasons that you do that little map. Is it required? No. But you're going to save a lot of people a lot of headache. This is very exciting to me, Charles. What sort of container are you going in? You know yet?
Well, I thought about I've thought about all kinds of options, but I think if I'm really going to go the full enchilada here, and say this as green as possible, it's going to be a shroud, and that's it. So
there's a lovely shroud maker in Efland, I think, who does artistic shrouds, and she starts with organic muslin to build the structure, and then she interviews you, and if you want, she'll paint sort of the timeline of your life, or if you were a traveler, maybe the geography of your life. I have seen her work and it's just exquisite, and it's very reasonably priced. But again, a grandmother's quilt that's not good for much anymore might be just the ideal thing to get wrapped up in.
Right.
And then what's your cost? You
and-
know, your cost is the backhoe. Yes.
Kirsten has a couple of questions. Kirsten, I'm going to ask you to say them out loud so that Anne hears you and the group hears you.
Yeah. Hi, Stephanie. Good to see you. Thanks for,
Hi,
I'm
good to see
I'm
you.
missing Terry online. Charles, good to see you. You probably wouldn't remember me that I met you before, but my question, Anne, again, thank you, is with regard to the water cremation.
Mhm.
If you walk out, if my children or my family walks out with an urn and ashes, are they allowed to spread that on my own farmland? Are they allowed to do
Yes.
that?
Yes.
Okay, without having to register that with?
Nope.
Okay. Okay.
I think there's a place on the death certificate that asks for the probable place of disposition. So if you know for sure that that's what they're going to do, you could have that put on the death certificate. Again, you're going to have to explain all this to the family before your death so that they know to do these kinds of things. If you want to do something like get thrown into the Eno as they go kayaking sometime, that, however, is against the law. As is shooting yourself out of fireworks off the North Carolina coast and a whole bunch of other things, national parks, state parks, etc. Disneyland, oh my God, those people are fascists. They have had so many ashes dumped at Disney in Florida that they have a special code that the security people know to identify where somebody is doing this thing. And they have also set aside a piece of their property, and you can pay to have your ashes distributed in that place. Now, let me also say that ashes are non-organic. They are going to burn whatever you put them on. It's sort of like firewood ash. We heat our house with wood. You can't just throw ash on the yard and hope that it's going to fertilize something, because it won't. You have to amend that with peat moss or something like that to keep it from burning your plants. So please don't ever put it on the roses, because there's disaster and sadness ahead. But if you've got, you know, a regular sized plot, you know, maybe an acre or a half acre, I think you could reasonably have yourself sprinkled across that and not hurt anything too badly.
And then I guess one final question, not to take up everybody else's questions, but what would be the resource for somebody to look at in terms of ashes, the rules and regulations? I didn't know that it would burn my rose bushes. Mm-hmm. My current gardening already burns my rose bushes, but I wouldn't want to do that with
intentionally. Yeah.
Right. So what's the, can you, on the chat, are you going to recommend some readings, ma'am?
I wasn't going to, but for this, there's this place on my website about cremation. And I think I picked that information up from Wikipedia and the Green Burial Council.
Very, very helpful. Thank you so much.
As I said, you know, I haven't made up any of this research. This is out there, and I have just cobbled it together and put it in a little package to talk for 30 minutes and talk you into something that I want you to do. So another reason I give talks on body donation, advance directives, having the conversation, and I think I've got one more. And somebody said, so why do you do all these talks? And I said, I give these talks so that I can tell you about green burial. I may, you know, spend an hour and a half on advanced directives, but by golly, when you leave, you're going to have my business card, which has no embalming, no vaults, no impervious containers on the back of it. And you're going to to always get my core message, which is green burial. And so I'm glad to have this screen full of folks captured and hearing what I consider the good news of green burial. Any other questions?
I have a question. I know with some funeral homes, you can do the pre-need stuff where you pay for it ahead. Can you also do that with the water cremation?
You'd have to talk to Hunter about that, the owner, because he is so new in business, and pre-need is actually an insurance policy.
Okay.
So if you go to a funeral home and you, somebody talks you through and you pick a package and you decide on something, and you pay the money, there's an insurance policy that is purchased with that money that protects that investment. And I don't think that Hunter is at that point yet, but he will give you a contract and not take your money, so that you would have the paperwork done, the family would know what your intention was. And he's not only aquamation, I think at his core, he is probably museum curator, because his business is, got his card here, just hanging around. It's aquamation and urn gallery. And if you look him up on the News of Orange, there was an article about him this fall, and there's a picture of him standing in front of some shelving with all these beautiful urns. They're all handmade and they're all North Carolina urns. And he's got big ones for big people and small ones for small people or pets. And he's got those little mini kind where some families divide up the ashes and give them to different family members. I've got a brother-in-law and my mother-in-law on a shelf here in our house in beautiful little bottles. One's alabaster and brass, and the other one is pewter. But all of Hunter's are pottery, art glass, bamboo with liners, that kind of stuff. And he would love to hear from you. I'll put his information in the text, in the email with the PowerPoint.
Thank you.
And let me ask you a question also.
Sure.
So I've had some discussions with friends in another part of the country about this trend that's going on. And their church, one of the things they did was look into some cemeteries that were, I will call them failed cemeteries. That they were in private practice. They were private cemeteries, but really had not done well, you know, and talked with the owner about that, about maybe perhaps either, I'm not sure, somehow using that property, part of that property for to offer as a an option for people in the congregation. And I don't want Stephanie or no Marcus at the church to get a feeling I'm getting ready to bring something to the council. I'm not. Okay. But it's a question. You know, if this, I think this is going to be something that's going to grow in popularity and for obvious reasons. So have you heard of any trends like that? Maybe congregations actually making moves?
Well, one thing, this is not a congregation, but the president of the Green Burial Council, the certification arm of that organization, lived in New Jersey, near Steelman Town, and he had an an infant brother who had died and was buried in Steelmantown Cemetery. And he went to the cemetery to visit his brother's grave when he was a grown man, and he couldn't find it. And the place was overgrown and looked like it had been abandoned. So he found out who the owner was, and it was an old man who had purchased the cemetery from a church that had left the area. But he was old and he was no longer financially or physically capable of taking care of the cemetery. And so he offered the cemetery to this man. His name is Ed Bixby. And Ed was a contractor. And so he knows about cleaning up property and moving dirt and GPSing and that sort of thing. So he goes home to his wife, who's an attorney, and he says, what would you think about me buying this cemetery over at Steelmantown? She said, absolutely not. Well, today he's the owner of 9 of these little cemeteries. And some of them are on the West Coast, and they were historic cemeteries that there was nobody to take care of them anymore. And some of them he took on for $1 or, some very small amount of money, and he cleans them up, and they are then opened up for new business, which helps him recover his costs in making them usable again. So I know about that. I also know that one large big name denomination in North Carolina closed a church in Orange County that had a cemetery. The cemetery was like 200 yards down the road, maybe. They decommissioned the church because they built a new church, and they were selling the church. But if you bought the church, you had to take the cemetery too. So this fellow wanted the church to put in a restaurant, but this was in 2008 during the recession, and the restaurant never came to pass, and he sold the building, but he couldn't get anybody to take the cemetery. Now, he did not want to be a cemeterian, and he tried to get the local Methodists to take it. Oh, I didn't want to tell you that. He tried to get the local congregation to take it over, and they wouldn't. He contacted the conference office in Raleigh, and they had no records. There are people who are today burying their loved ones in that cemetery without telling this guy who owns the cemetery. There's somebody who mows the grass in that cemetery, but he doesn't know who's coming to do it or why they're doing it. It's a very peculiar situation. So as far as taking on old cemeteries, there's a census. The North Carolina Cemetery Commission required all the counties, they asked all the counties to do a census of all their cemeteries. And there are thousands, like 12,000 cemeteries in North Carolina. Some of them on private land, some of them abandoned, some of them are not abandoned but not used. Some of them are in traffic circles. They're just, people are scattered all over the landscape, and a lot of them aren't being taken care of. The families have died. The churches have lost membership and they close down, and nobody takes them over. And I think there are opportunities, I really do, for small churches with aging populations to perhaps sell plots to develop revenue for the congregation, to fix roofs, air conditioning, that kind of stuff. But there's an awful lot of cemetery space just not being used. And Charles, if you could figure out some plan, I'd be really grateful, because We don't need to be opening up new cemeteries. We've got plenty of inventory. We just don't have it in places and responding to the particular needs of the people who need these cemetery plots right now.
Thank you.
I know we're getting over time, Anne, but this is a personal question. My mother is asking to be cremated, and I'd love to convince her to do a green burial. And so what would you say to her if you were me that would help with that?
Does she recycle?
She's learned to compost because of my pestering her.
I had some bumper stickers made, and one of the slogans is radical recycling. That if you are an organ donor or a recycler, this is right in line with your ordinary values, your everyday way of living. And if she is a thrifty person, talking to her about saving the $800 on the embalming and saving say $5,000 on a coffin, and saving a couple $1,000s on a vault, may
she's all about
sweeten it up.
She's all about that. She thinks of cremation as a green alternative, and what I'm learning tonight is that it's not necessary.
No, and that'll be on my website and also on Wikipedia. Just you are releasing a lot of volatile compounds into the atmosphere. The mercury in our fillings is going right out into the atmosphere. Now, in a green burial, you're going to bury that stuff, but it's going to be sequestered in the soil instead of being released immediately into the atmosphere. You are not having all this carbon monoxide going out into the atmosphere. From a climate standpoint, cremation is pretty bad. It's not as bad as conventional burial, but it's pretty bad. Now, if you could talk her into water cremation, that is very sustainable.
We thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Megan.
Oh, I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about human composting.
Yeah, that's it's kind of expensive right now. It started out at $5,000. It's now about $6,500. It's only in urban areas right at the moment. New York City is really anxious for this because there's no more cemetery space. And so what you do is you place the body in a pod with alfalfa hay, some soil, some water. They may put a little activator in that. I read that recently. The science for this was done at the North Carolina Body Farm at Western Carolina University in Cullowhee. And they have figured out the temperature, how much agitation there needs to be of the stuff in the pod in order to break the body down as quickly as possible. And then what you're getting is all of that organic material that was put in with the body, plus the body's decomposed bits too. I wish it were less expensive, but I think that that with people accepting the notion of it, that there will be other techniques developed to do a similar thing for less money as time goes on. One thing I ask people to do is, after they make their plans, after they write them down, after they tell their family, don't spend the money. Don't spend the money yet. If you're about to die, go ahead and spend the money. But if you've got another 5 years in you, you think, save the money, put it aside, and wait for the next big thing. In the short period of time that I've been doing this work, in Orange County, we now have a conservation burial ground. In Orange County, we now have an aquamation machine. Those things were just pie in the sky for me 8 years ago. What could happen in the next 5? I don't know, but don't spend your money yet. There will always be space. All right. And the earth takes care of us, right? Billions and billions of people have lived and died before us. Hundreds of thousands of years, animals all over. And they're not stinking up the place. The earth takes care of us. The earth deals with us when we're gone. We don't have to fussy it up. It's part of the system, and the earth will take care.
Well, thank you, Anne. You're very inspiring, and you've done a lot of hard work and are keeping up with all of the changing trends, which is excellent. We probably need to have you come back in a year or two. But we'll look forward to getting your PowerPoint. And is your website on the PowerPoint?
Yes, on that last slide.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's greenburialproject.org.
Okay.
All right.
Well,
I'll see you
thank you
another
very
time.
much. And thank you, Megan. Thank you, Megan, for getting her
Thanks,
to
Megan.
us. Thank you.